Let's go ahead and introduce today's panel, A Point of View from Middle America, a design, fashion, and photography perspective from the middle of America. This panel will bring several diverse and influential creatives together to discuss living and working in the Midwest, how St. Louis shapes and inspires them, and how every artist's point of view is influenced by location. Without further ado, I introduce today's moderator, Rachel Brandt, Executive Editor of Alive magazine.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's early, so we really appreciate you coming out, and thank you to all these great panelists. We really have a good group to talk to today. And thanks to Mike and Tara again for having us out in all of Design Week. If you go to different events this week, you'll know that throughout the Midwest, and especially in St. Louis, we have such an incredible pool of talent here and such a unique perspective. So that's what we're going to talk about today, specifically related to photography and fashion and design. So without further ado, I'm going to do a little introduction and then we'll jump right in. On the end over here we have Psyche Southwell. Psyche is the creator and editor of Economy of Style. It's a website that produces narratives and visual content on fashion and style on a budget. She's appeared in several publications, including Redbook, Cosmopolitan, on Refinery 29, and she's appeared as a media personality for NBC and CBS. She's also been named the best budget blogger in St. Louis and a top 5 black budget blogger, fashion blogger in the US. So Psyche's an incredible person and a very cool creative, and she was also the 2015 Redbook Real Women of Style winner. So thank you. Michael Drummond is next. You might recognize his face. He's an apparel designer and he was on Project Runway. Awesome. TV star. His client list includes Tika Sumpter and New York Fashion Week founder Fern Malice, and also supermodel Heidi Klum. He has a very vast bevy of incredible clients, so we're really excited to have Michael here today. He also was recognized with A Queen Within, which was the World Chess Hall of Fame exhibit, and at the Missouri History Museum's little black dress he also exhibited. With a lot of great designers. So he's a costume designer for countless operas, dances, and theatrical productions as well. Slow down, I'm getting tripped up here. So let's give Michael a hand. Next we have Attilio D'Agostino. Attilio is a fashion photographer and lifestyle photographer. He shoots all over the US. He's an entrepreneur, the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Alive magazine. He's lived and worked in St. Louis for a long time with several very influential St. Louisans as well as people worldwide and celebrities. So Attilio, thank you for being here. He worked in finance in the corporate world in Wells Fargo for a long time, from 2006 to 2012. But he followed his dream starting in 2012, and actually was following his dream a long time before that, working up to opening East and West, which is a men's boutique, fashion boutique, and lifestyle boutique in the Central West End. He just opened his new store, so congratulations, Brian. Next we have Kevin Kelly, a man of many projects. Kevin's a designer, a photographer, a producer. He's spoken on a lot of St. Louis Design Week panels, and is a professional panelist. He's interested in redefining the standard methods in art and business while motivating everyone to take control of their career and steer their own lives. Kevin's been influential to me for a long time because he's always been an independent, and he has given a lot of advice to upcoming creatives and independents in St. Louis and beyond on how to ignite your career. He's also the owner of Anti-Agency and the co-founder of Snake by Co. So to kick us off, let's talk about where we were raised so everyone can stereotype us right away. I know a lot of you grew up in St. Louis and a lot of you didn't. So whether you were raised in St. Louis or you relocated here, I want to start off by talking about how this city and the Midwest as a whole really influences your work and your business and your art. And so let's get started by talking about where you've come from and how you got started in your projects. You want to start?
Sure. Well, I like to tell people that I pretty much replaced one saint with another. So I was born and raised in St. Kitts in the Eastern Caribbean, and now I live here in St. Louis. And as a blogger and local influencer, I think one of the biggest ways that St. Louis plays a part in the work that I do is just kind of the physical environment for one. From historical buildings to ghost signs to graffiti walls. Once I started kind of taking on the city, it really pushed me to be more creative. And that's kind of one of the huge ways that it's kind of influenced my work.
And to follow that, hi, I'm Michael, like you said, grew up here in St. Louis, Ferguson, Florissant School District in North County. Thank you. Are we supposed to talk on what inspires us in the city? Sorry, I missed that part.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead and talk about just St. Louis as a whole in the Midwest and how that inspires your work and how you got started designing.
Great. Okay, sorry. I'm usually not awake yet. So let's see here. I grew up in St. Louis, and I think there's from an early age I've always been sort of inspired by art and design. So that was just a given. I had nothing to do with that really, but I think after graduating high school, traveling to San Francisco and studying there, and then coming back after failing miserably, I really found my roots here just because of the community and the stability of having my family and really having the ability to take chances without having to be financially strapped all the time like I was in San Francisco. So I think that just living here in the early stages where there really wasn't any, I can think of maybe 2 people who were designing clothing in that period in the early 2000s. So it was a complete clean slate to do whatever.
Your turn.
I grew up on the West Coast in the Los Angeles area and moved to the Midwest in the mid-90s and then discovered St. Louis in the late 90s, and that's when I moved here in 98. And to me, having grown up we're in a landscape where everything is brown and all the buildings are stucco, the most exotic thing in the world to me were cornfields, trees, and brick. So I fell in love with St. Louis. Los Angeles there's no central core. Obviously there is, but that's not the way you live there. And in St. Louis, there is a central core, and along with that comes a sense of shared experience. And that has been something that's really meant a lot to me. And the way that my life through the time that I've been here becomes interwoven with those around me. And I cross paths again and again in different ways with people who have been in my life before and with the city in different ways. And that is, I believe, not just a unique experience to St. Louis, but a unique experience to many of the smaller cities that were designed in this way with a central core. So although the city itself has a lot of challenges that we're working to overcome, I think that idea at the heart of it is a huge asset. And it's something that has been majorly influential in my work in one of the ways in just giving me the opportunity to start creating, much in the same way that Michael did. The barrier to access here is so much less than a larger city like Chicago or New York or Los Angeles, that somebody like myself and my partner were able to get a toehold, build a network, and create a platform that we may not have been able to do in a larger city without a huge amount of capital.
Yeah, so I was born and raised here in St. Louis, and I think some of the common things you'll hear in my story, you'll hear in other people's as well. But one of the things, so I've always been into design and fashion. I was actually a punk rock kid growing up, but the funny thing was I wasn't that good at music, but I got really into the fashion of it. And that kind of started my, dipped my toes into that world. And from there, it kind of grew in terms of how I interacted with fashion and whatnot. What really kind of inspired me initially was traveling. And so luckily, I was fortunate enough to do a lot of road trips when I was younger, and then as I got older with a little more money, I was able to start flying to places and, went to New York and California and saw these amazing things that inspired me. But what was interesting as I as I started thinking about it, I was like, wouldn't it be amazing to like move the needle here a little bit instead of moving away? And so even though I feel like, you know, in some ways there's different areas of our city that maybe, you know, we're not as far developed in, you know, maybe arts or fashion as maybe like New York or LA might be. But like Michael and Attilio and Psyche said, it's like the access to get into that world here is the barrier's a lot lower, and to be able to be a part of that fabric and, you know, woven into it is it's pretty amazing. And one of the things I've definitely, you know, I took for granted for a long time, and I've really come to appreciate now is like the quality of life you can sustain here, along with doing something you're passionate about. Because I have a lot of friends that live in New York and a lot that live in Los Angeles and San Francisco, and they're doing amazing things, but they're literally living like day to day just to survive. And they're doing amazing work, but they have so much anxiety and stress about just making it to the next day to pay for their bills. It's like, it doesn't allow them the freedom to create the way that it might, you know, here or Kansas City or another city around the Midwest. So.
Wow, those are all excellent answers that I have to follow. I'm also the son of St. Louis, Brian, and I guess that how it influences you, right? I already forgot the question again, too.
I know, I'm happy to start.
You know, it wasn't like I chose St. Louis, it was just that I was here. And I think that it took me a while to realize the gift that I was given in the city through traveling as well. I took off in about 2009, just for a couple months. I thought it was gonna be like a year, but it turned out to be like 3 months. Went to California for the first time, went up and down, went to Portland, and I came back with this just huge pride of being a St. Louis, and I don't really know why, but it was good to be home again and not have to, you know, worry about my next, where I was going to stay that night. And that's kind of a simple answer, but it was just like this overwhelming sense of pride when I got back home that stuck with me ever since. And realizing the weaknesses and the strengths that we have, I call St. Louis the eternal underdog. But I mean that in a great way because it means that you're going to do something within the city that has not yet happened. So, I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm just trying to match the answers of these people.
No, that's great, thank you. I love where this is going. You all have so much pride for St. Louis, and I think it's great that you touched on that it's more affordable to start a career here, and that's a great reason to stay, especially if you've come here to go to school and you're starting out, you're an entrepreneur, you're starting a new career, and that's a great reason to build that here. How do you stay relevant and stay in St. Louis and compete in fashion and photography and design with people in LA and New York and on the coasts, and keep your business fresh and artistic and while you're here? And how do we stack up against those coastal cities? Who wants to take that?
On the end, right? Well, it's funny, you know, as somebody who's a St. Louis transplant, I've actually always thought that there was some kind of intrinsic value to being in the middle of the country. And that actually became more apparent to me when I was selected last year to be on the cover of Red Book magazine with 5 other women. Well, thank you. While I was at that shoot in New York City with these 5 other women from across the country, immediately I realized, wait a minute, there's 6 of us. 4 of us are from the South of the Midwest, 2 from the Midwest, right? Chicago and St. Louis were represented there. And since then, since Red Book has kind of sought after me to work with campaigns and some of their brands, I've immediately realized, and I became increasingly aware rather, that they wanted to have representation in this area. They wanted to have a presence there. So now when I approach my work, knowing that brands want to work in this area, they find our populations in our area valuable. I actually, I work to remain cognizant of the quality of my brand. I run the blog, of course, Economy of Style, and I want to produce a quality product that brands would be interested in working with, because they want to work here. I'd say 3 of my largest campaigns that I achieved or worked on this year, 2 of them were looking specifically for people in St. Louis. And that kind of says something. So there's interest here. So work on producing a quality product that these brands would be interested in if you're doing that kind of work, because there's interest here in the area. I think it's valuable.
So, relevant in St. Louis. For me, as someone who works in design, I have it's sort of a rule. Years ago, I stopped looking at fashion magazines. I always feel like they're just sort of set up to make you feel sort of dissatisfied with your life anyway. So I'm like, eh. But I also don't really want that paradigm in my brain. So, and then everything that I see on the coasts sort of becomes the same thing. Like, LA has this look, and New York sort of has this look, and the southern designers kind of have a look. So I want to say, well, then the Midwestern designers do, but I don't think we do. And I feel like, I don't know if the word is like a vacuum, but we're in a sort of, if we choose to, we can be really insular, or we can, go on the internet and be global. But for me, I try to just, work in my head and hope that it pans out and is relevant. And I've been fortunate enough to, and I think that I have a client that still comes to me for what it is. And I'm thinking about this story and what you were just speaking on. And I remember, I don't really like talking about Project Runway because it's sort of, take it or leave it. But I remember when I got to show at New York Fashion Week on site, at Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week. And I was a decoy. I'd been kicked off the show, but the media didn't know that. And I remember there were 9 of us, and Tim Gunn came back and looked at everyone's collection. And they always keep the winning 3 at the end of the collections, but they try to open the show with the strongest one. And I opened, which was awesome. And I'm not saying this to be like word, but I was competing against people from New York, people from LA, people from the South. And I remember getting an email from Michael Kors, and that he was like, that was amazing, you had won. Heidi Klum was blown away. The next year, my good friend Laura Kathleen, who's also a St. Louisan, had the same advantage. She showed first. Like, her collection was stronger than these people from New York. Her collection was stronger than people from LA. At least according to Tim Gunn, who's like an insane tastemaker. So I think there is an advantage. I mean, I don't know how to put my finger on it, but there's an advantage here. We're not stressed out as much as my friends who come from New York, and they're like, you get all this space? And they're like,
You're
yeah.
a bit of a wild card.
Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of what my takeaway was.
Yeah. How do you stay relevant in your photography?
I think that I would agree with Michael in the respect that I think that it's very hard for someone to create truly from their heart and not be relevant. I think that there is the danger of thinking that you're creating something special and new that can happen in places like this when really you're replicating something that was happening several years ago. So because people are behind, and I do see artists get caught in that trap here. So I think that that's a place where it is important to be aware of what's happening globally and making sure that are your influences true to yourself versus are you copying something that is older that maybe feels fresh and new to you. And so I think that as you're coming up as an artist, it's one of the things that if anybody here has been in art school, I'm sure you totally get this, you have to learn the rules, right? The rules of the classics before you know how to break them. And I think understanding your perspective in the history, whether it's photography or painting or design, whatever your medium may be, architecture, where are you, who's come before you, what have they done? And then from there, working to craft your own space and then trusting your instincts. And especially what I found that relates very much to Michael is, I think that if I had been a photographer in LA or in Milan or in New York, you're so immersed around other photographers and the demands of the people whom you serve that then shapes your world and your aesthetic. So one of the disadvantages that I have is in my medium, I don't have as many models to work with. So I don't have as much of a palette to create with, right? I can't create as much work. But what it's also challenged me to do is it's challenged me to find different ways, maybe somebody who is not a professional model, and do something interesting with them and stretch myself. But what it's also resulted in is a greater flowering of my own sensibilities, which has created an originality that's benefited me by then becoming recognized by photographers and influencers and tastemakers in those markets. So becoming in demand in LA and New York and Europe and respected by the photographers and world of critics in that space because what I'm offering is something unique and different. And I often wonder if I'd been in those environments where my work was being so much shaped by the demands around me, would I have ended up offering something that was set apart and had a unique aesthetic and perspective to it?
Yeah, so one of the ways I feel like that's been really important for me, stay relevant with what that means, but is for me it's important to travel. And what I've noticed about that, and not saying like travel to New York or LA to see what's going on, but like travel to experience different cultures. And one of the things that has been really good for me is to see like hospitality in different areas and what that looks like at restaurants and hotels, and trying to think outside the box, not just from like a fashion store, but what does it look like to go eat at somebody's restaurant? And I've been fortunate enough to go to Europe a few times, and like I sat at this like little fisherman's house in Croatia off the coast, and it was like this amazing experience where there's only like 8 people in the restaurant. He was cooking the fish, and it was just it provided an experience for me that I hadn't had before. And not because it was like the location of it, but it's just the way he treated me and the product he put in front of me and whatnot. And so I try to relate those things back to what I'm doing. And so as having a store here in St. Louis, for me, it's like, how do I create a hospitality for my customers when they come in with authenticity that, all of a sudden that label of being out, you take away St. Louis and just like, oh, this is like a really great store and they offer really great products. And, it's kind of funny. It's like a compliment, but also like a diss at the same time. But like a lot of times people come in like who aren't from St. Louis, like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm in New York right now. I'm like, well, that's kind of cool, but St. Louis is pretty awesome too, And so anyway, for me, so that's been really good for me. It is like, in terms of like outside of creating, but just to experience different cultures, to travel around a lot. And so I can make it a point to go on different trips every year. Not always extravagant. Sometimes it's just like an hour outside of St. Louis to like these little hiking trails that I didn't know existed, but just get outside of my everyday world to do something new. So.
Yeah, I think this is a conversation that has changed drastically over the past 10 years, and especially in the past 5 years, in the sense that the increasing globalization of everything, we're aware of everything going on much more. And there was a time that professional photographers, I'm sure Jay Ferrand, who's a professional photographer as well, can remember, I've talked to people who said that they were geographically disabled or geographically passed over once the client found out that they're from St. Louis. And I just don't, or even with ad agency work, it's like, we don't take the Midwest firms seriously. They're just going to do kind of all the promotion and PR work. We'll give the big campaigns to the coastal firms. And I find that happening less and less because, one, we're cheaper in some respects than coastal work. And there's also just the ability for everybody to develop their taste easier than before and see what's going on. And like Psyche said, people are focusing more on here because there is this niche formation of America, of every single story in every single city, and all of the stars from that city, or all the talents from that city really coming forth and giving it its own kind of vibe and presence. And as important as it is to look outward and be formed and have the rules and know the rules, there's also, like you said, the struggle of where we are and the lack of things that we may not have that form us as we go on to make something different. So while we may not have palm trees and, you know, California models, we are able to create our own vibe presence through the surroundings that we have and make something unique in that way. So.
Nice. You all have successfully had or built independent careers, and I know there's a lot of young people here that might have recently graduated or about to graduate and trying to decide if they should have an independent career or not. And what advice can you give them about starting out in photography and design and art, and even if they're looking to be an entrepreneur? And do you feel like they have resources here? And if not, what are we doing wrong? What can St. Louis be doing better?
Don't be independent when you start out.
What?
Don't be independent when you start out.
Talk about
That's
that.
my advice. My advice is that you're never happy unless you work for yourself, but I don't recommend it to anybody. And it is a double-edged sword, for sure. You have this idealistic point of view of like, oh my God, I can wake up whenever I want to and just do the cool shit all day long. And then, you know, that fades and you're in poverty and crying into your worn pillow sheet. But I think that there's a period of sacrifice that everybody needs to go through, part of that learning the rules, to where you just kind of kill your ego, which is huge when you're young, and sacrifice your time and energy for someone who can teach you. Even if they don't think that you can teach you can learn from your negative experiences. And you don't have to worry about hustling the streets and trying to make your own money. You're able to, you know, work passively and show up somewhere and make money every 2 weeks. So I say, never start out independent. That's, you know, a lot of people have broken that rule and have been amazing at it, but I think it's easier to have a period of sacrifice.
Yeah, I would, I probably had one of the most interesting career changes here. I worked downtown at Wells Fargo before this for the, you know, one of the largest banks in the world, and went from a firm of, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of employees to a firm of one employee, but I did everything. So to say that it was a little bit of a culture shock was huge. For me, looking back, I mean, I haven't been doing it super long. It's been, you know, coming up on 5 years now. Starting your own business or being an entrepreneur, what's been crucial as I look back that have kind of set the, you know, foundation steps, for, as you could say, has been like having mentors in my life who have gone before me, basically, whether that's in fashion or, I mean, you know, I look at just small business owners in general for myself as mentors who understand what I'm going through, but also have been through maybe some of the trials I have. And then also, as Kevin would say, like, for me, like, working at Wells Fargo wasn't like the sexiest career, but like I learned coming out of school like a lot of really valuable like life and work skills there. And I learned what it meant to like interact with people of all ages and demographics. I learned how to like give a presentation in front of, I was like 25 years old and everybody in the crowd was like 50. And, you know, learning how to like own what I knew and being able to project that to other people and whatnot. And the last thing I would say is starting a business of any kind, whatever it might be, is where I've seen a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of even my friends fail is that like they have this amazing idea and it might be something that kind of new and groundbreaking, but they don't worry about like the back end of it, like your budget and the finances and just the like the logistical stuff, all the stuff that's not fun. Like unfortunately, you have to like know about that and have it like tied up behind the scenes, because if you don't, as great as your idea might be, it's going to be a flash in the pan, unfortunately, if you don't like that, just to make sure everything else is on track. And so whenever I talk to folks who are thinking about starting their business, those are kind of the things I try to, you know, focus on in terms of what I've learned. So.
I think that one of the things that Kevin said really resonated with me when I first started the magazine, because my interests had been in design and fashion. I was producing and styling the shoots, and that's how I actually came to photography. I hadn't really had any relationship to photography prior to that. And what I did for a number of years, and I didn't realize it at the time, which is always such an interesting thing to look back upon, but a photographer from St. Louis who has done a lot of beautiful work, his name is Rick Gould, he was our photographer at the time, and he had worked commercially, and he had worked in his own artistic work, and I had spent all this time around a really experienced photographer, and so I didn't realize I was absorbing it at the time. I wasn't intending to be a photographer, so I wasn't assisting, but I was assisting. And that taught me so much and gave me an insight into the value of interning and assisting. And I think that applies for me as photography, but I think it's in any level of your field. Understanding just how the world works that you're going to be creating in gives you such an advantage. So to see how a shoot is produced, how a photographer speaks with a model, how a photographer speaks with an agency, all these simple little things that you absorb that you may not have learned in a vacuum becomes such an asset to you. So whether it is talking to other entrepreneurs who can give you insight into what are all the things in the back office you need to be paying attention to so that your creative production has the platform that it needs and the foundation in order to succeed, or on the creative side, what are the logistics of getting things done and producing in that world. Anything you can do to intern, assist as often as possible, I don't know that there's much more valuable than that, because that gives you the tools that you need to then be your best.
I am going to echo those sentiments. Working for someone else is priceless in that you can see what works for them, what doesn't work for them, how they spend their money, where their sourcing comes from. You can build relationships with their relationships. You see how delegation works. It's literally, it's priceless, and usually you get paid, so that's good. I still work for others. I diversify. I think that has been the trick for me, is being able to be diversified enough that, like, if there's a commercial in town, I'm gonna style it and I'll figure out a way to get it in to my schedule. Or if there is a ballet or a theater production and they want costuming that's gonna A, increase my network, B, give me a new creative vision or outlet, and then also just, I think it's just good to explore other options as an independent, because it's tricky and you don't always know where the money's going to come from. But I would say if you want to be independent, you should probably work for someone else first, and be prepared to make a lot of sacrifices that are, not always glamorous. I think a lot of people in fashion design, they think it's all like runway shows and champagne dreams and caviar wishes or something, and really it's 1% fashion show, and then a lot of being in your basement trying to figure out, how to make a pattern and blah blah blah, and losing your 20s. So.
I really like that point about kind of diversifying. Working now as an influencer or blogger, so to speak, a lot of people look at the work we do and the glamorous work we do sometimes, but there's a lot of work in the back end, and I've had to learn to diversify my expertise. I'm a photographer, I'm a writer, I'm a graphic designer sometimes, I'm a site developer. And like Michael, I had a completely different background. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I would be here doing this kind of work, I would have called you a liar, right? I was a professor teaching social policy and research, and I always did that while developing my blog and business on the side. And now things have kind of shifted. I do still do work on a consulting basis in research and development, but my blog has kind of taken the center stage. But I learned those skills like over the years, and I developed the skills as I went along, and it got better. If you look at my archives and I leave them up, my blog looked like crap kind of when I started. You know, like photography wasn't as good. I was using a point and shoot camera. So it was just about kind of pacing myself, learning as much as I can, always developing, taking things away, adding some things, but just being realistic about what I could get from it. And again, diversify those kind of expertise, because in this area you can be called on to do a lot of different things, and you've got to be ready to do it.
Thank you so much. So let's switch gears for this next question. It's an election year, and we're not going to talk about that as much, but I do want to talk about social issues. Oh, okay.
We're getting political.
I do want to talk about social issues within your work, though. And when you're building a personal brand and you're building your business's brand and you're making your art, what obligation do you feel to comment on social issues that are happening? I think the world is looking at St. Louis right now in a lot of different ways, and also it is an election year. So what obligation do you feel when you're creating your work? Don't everybody jump in. Attilio, can you start?
My personal work generally doesn't have a lot of social commentary to it. Sometimes in my fashion stories, I do work it in, because I'm a very political person. But one place where this is really relevant to my experience was when Mike Brown was killed. I felt I had to